we'll be looking at alternative theories and showing what we believe is undeniable evidence that mainstream geology is at best missing a large chunk of info, and at worst is purposeful misinformation designed to hide the truth. So mainstream geology teaches us petrification and fossilization takes millions of years and largely ignores evidence that questions these claims. But there are many examples where petrification and fossilization can occur at a much faster pace. So many that you have to ask the question, why is it ignored? So let's go through some of these examples.
So all you have to do is get animals, plants buried rapidly during the flood. And that's important because, remember, if you leave a dead cow out in the field, the vultures and other animals are going to rip it apart and it's going to rot and decay. You're not going to produce a fossil. You've got to bury it rapidly. And so millions of years isn't the solution. Rapid geological processes during the flood are, where the sediments are going to bury all the dead animals very rapidly.
These set of videos will be going through mainstream geology and its links to the falsification of history. We'll be questioning mainstream assumptions about fossilization and petrification, the dinosaur subject, and tie it into what we suspect from evidence it's linked to not just giant humans that existed in the past, but everything in general being bigger, from huge lizards and various types of what we would class as oversized animals, to giant trees and fruit, plants. It will also amaze you what these petrified remains can turn into and produce, from sparkling opals, silver, and various metals. Yes, that does include gold too.
Have you ever looked at a rock and wondered how it came to be? The story begins about 4.5 billion years ago, as gas and dust come together to form the rocks that make up our planet. Created from elements forged far off in the galaxy, rocks really are the stuff of stars. And so are we. Rocks, and the minerals they're made of, tell us the story of our planet. Look closely. Atoms are the building blocks of all matter. Combined, atoms form molecules. Minerals are made up of billions of molecules, which are often arranged in crystal structures. Minerals can crystallize from semi-molten rock called magma. When magma cools and solidifies, it forms igneous rocks, one of the three main rock types: igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. Granite is an intrusive igneous rock, commonly found on the Earth's continents. It has large crystals because it cools slowly, deep below the Earth's surface. When a volcano erupts, lava cools quickly to form small crystals, creating extrusive igneous rock, like basalt. Basalt makes up much of the ocean floor and also most of the moon. Over time, rocks are broken down by weathering effects like water, wind, heat, or ice. Small fragments, known as sediments, wash into lakes, rivers, and the sea. Here, layers of sediments compact and cement together over millions of years to form sedimentary rocks, like sandstone. Limestone is another kind of sedimentary rock. It can form from the remains of marine organisms or from chemical reactions within sediments. Fossils in limestone are an amazing record of the past, revealing clues to changes of climate and the extinction of life forms throughout the Earth's history.
That is the mainstream version of geology, and I'm not saying that all of it is untrue, but like with many subjects, I believe it's only telling you a fraction of the truth. We'll be looking at alternative theories and showing what we believe is undeniable evidence that mainstream geology is at best missing a large chunk of info, and at worst is purposeful misinformation designed to hide the truth. We'll be highlighting largely research that has been done by some fantastic researchers in the subject, and I'll be tying it into stuff that I have found locally in Portland, Dorset. So mainstream geology teaches us petrification and fossilization takes millions of years and largely ignores evidence that questions these claims. But there are many examples where petrification and fossilization can occur at a much faster pace. So many that you have to ask the question, why is it ignored? So let's go through some of these examples. Dr. Robert Gentry. Robert was a young American Earth creationist and nuclear physicist, known for his claims that radio halos provide evidence for a young age of the Earth. So I won't go through his whole biography, but just read a little bit so you can see what his credentials are. So Gentry received a master's degree in physics from the University of Florida and then worked in the defense industry in nuclear weapons research. In 1959, he was influenced by a verse he read in the Bible while looking at polonium halos, and subsequently converted to Seventh-day Adventism. And if you come down here, by this time he was convinced that radio halos might be the key to determining the age of the Earth and might be capable of vindicating flood geology. He basically looked for evidence that there was scientific evidence for the biblical flood. But there is some research and a certain experiment that he has done which is super interesting. In the 1980s, Dr. Robert Gentry and his son David did an experiment which really brings into question how long it takes wood to turn into coal in a process called coalification. Mainstream science and geology will have you believe it's millions of years.
Earlier we took a piece of wood like this, inserted it in this steel pipe, added some water, and then sealed it up. The next step is to put it in the oven at about 160 degrees centigrade for 2 weeks. Now we're ready to examine the results of this experiment.
We can see this wood is now darker in color. It's also softer.
A chemical reaction between the steam and the wood under pressure has caused these changes to occur. This specimen isn't coal yet, but clearly the process of coalification has begun.
The question is, would coal result if this experiment, or a variation of it, continued for a longer period of time?
Scientists at Argonne National Laboratory have answered this question in a series of experiments performed in the 1980s. One of the earliest reports about their work appeared in the magazine Chemical and Engineering News in the November 21, 1983 issue. On page 42 of this issue, we read the following quote: "Chemists at Argonne National Laboratory have succeeded in making a type of artificial coal from naturally occurring materials. The process is much less severe than formerly thought to be necessary and provides some new insights into coal structure and how to alter it." Later, after their published reports appeared in the science journal Organic Geochemistry, the British science journal Nature reported on the success of their experiments. On page 316 of the journal Nature, March 28, 1985, we read the following: "Winans and his colleagues at Argonne National Laboratory have taken less than 1 year to prepare a thoroughly characterized synthetic coal. The material they produce is indistinguishable from the real thing by all the techniques so far applied to it, and its synthesis raises many interesting questions in coal chemistry."
This qualified wood specimen comes from La Salle, Utah, a uranium mine. Its presumed geologic age is around 140 million years.
This specimen of coalified wood comes from a uranium mine in the Temple Mountain area here in Utah. Its presumed age is also 140 million years. But look how closely this specimen resembles this other piece of wood. They're nearly identical. It's interesting to note that this other piece of wood was derived from a fresh piece of wood like this, just a few weeks ago.
This close similarity raises an important question. Is it really true that this piece of coalified wood from La Salle, Utah, and this piece of coalified wood from Temple Mountain, Utah, are really 140 million years older than this piece of wood, which David and I recently obtained in some of our experiments? Not really.
Some of you may be asking yourself, well, that's not fossilization or petrification. It's not, but it gives you an idea of what mainstream portrays to be true in geology compared to what the reality actually is. It also brings into question what coal mines actually are. Are they just trees that are going through the coalification process? Dr. Andrew Snelling. Andrew is another what they call creationist. This is the phrase that they seem to coin if it's not deemed as the accepted mainstream version of events. There's quite a few of these guys, and again, I'm sure a lot of people, mainstream geologists in particular, will pass these people off as religious nutjobs. But these guys have PhDs in their field and are experts. I'm no religious man myself, but the evidence they present has to be considered on its merit alone. One of the main reasons I wanted to highlight Dr. Snelling is he has had his work and his theories confirmed by some Japanese geologists who experimented over many years in a place called Tateyama Hot Springs in Japan. Here's Andrew talking about it.
Yes, it's interesting. I got a real buzz one day when an article came out in a conventional geological journal, and they actually referenced an article I'd written in a creationist magazine. And what it was some Japanese scientists had read that and decided to experiment themselves. I'd written an article about the rapid petrification of wood. And so what they did is they took some pieces of wood and suspended it with on ropes into a hot volcanic spring water in Japan. And over a 7-year period, they took one out each year and looked at it under the microscope, and they actually tracked the silica the chemicals that were in the hot volcanic water, the water permeated into the wood, into the cells, and progressively over those few years, the silica had filled and totally replaced and petrified the wood. In my article, I'd referred, similar to the example you gave, of fence posts in outback Australia, where the farmer, the rancher, had come back years later to renew the fence and discovered that the posts had become petrified in the ground. And so it's everyone knows it's a rapid process. They've even done it at springs, hot water springs in Yellowstone National Park, similar experiments. So it's well known that these processes are rapid. The only reason why people think in terms of millions of years is because they've been conditioned to think in millions of years. But experimental and observational evidence shows that these processes are rapid. So all you have to do is get animals, plants buried rapidly during the flood. And that's important because, remember, if you leave a dead cow out in the field, the vultures and other animals are going to rip it apart and it's going to rot and decay. You're not going to produce a fossil. You've got to bury it rapidly. And so millions of years isn't the solution. Rapid geological processes during the flood are, where the sediments are going to bury all the dead animals very rapidly, and therefore the conditions are right with the pressure, the chemicals that are buried in the water in the sediments are going to transform those into fossils.